The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Alliance sparkled like a freshly polished trophy wife's collection of diamonds. Which is to say, it was trying way too hard to look important. Crystalline chandeliers floated through some technologically advanced means that was probably just magnets with a fancy name, while the walls shifted through various shades of precious metals, because apparently regular paint wasn't good enough for the most prestigious governing body in the known universe. High Councillor Zixital, a being who resembled what might happen if you crossed a peacock with a jellyfish and then gave it a bureaucrat's soul, adjusted their shimmer robes for the 15th time in as many minutes, their tentacles twisted in agitation as they reviewed the datapad floating before them. "This cannot be correct," they announced to the assembled council members, each representing different species and looking various degrees of concerned, bored, or constipated. "According to these reports, the humans have achieved faster-than-light travel using something they developed while trying to make their morning stimulant more efficient." "The reports are accurate, High Councillor," wheezed Ambassador Pixtrill, whose species had evolved from something akin to a hyper-intelligent dust bunny. "They call it the quantum coffee drive. Apparently someone spilled their espresso into a particle accelerator." A collective shudder ran through the chamber. The Alliance had been monitoring Earth for centuries, and nothing terrified them more than humanity's dependence on their bitter bean juice. The fact that humans willingly ingested a substance that could strip paint from spacecraft was concerning enough. That they had somehow weaponized it into a revolutionary propulsion system was nothing short of horrifying. "And now they want membership in the Alliance?" snorted Councillor Vreen, whose snout was particularly well suited for snorting. "These are the same beings who, when told something is impossible, say, 'Hold my coffee,' and then proceed to break several laws of physics out of spite." "That's precisely why we need to consider their application carefully," Zixital said, their bioluminescence pulsing with anxiety. "Need I remind the Council of the incident?" The chamber fell silent. Every member present knew exactly which incident the High Councillor meant. It had only been 3 standard cycles since a human engineer had casually handed their beverage to an Alliance observer before proceeding to fix a quantum core breach using nothing but something called duct tape, a paperclip, and what they claimed was the power of spite and caffeine. The repair shouldn't have worked. It couldn't have worked. Yet somehow that jury-rigged solution was now being studied by the Alliance's top scientists, who still couldn't explain how it violated at least 7 fundamental laws of physics while simultaneously improving the core's efficiency by 300%. "Perhaps," ventured Ambassador Pixtrill, shedding anxiety dust onto the pristine floor, "we should consider what might happen if we deny their application. Do we really want a species that treats impossibility as a personal challenge to remain unsupervised?" The council chamber erupted into nervous chatter, their voices mixing with the soft hum of the anti-gravity chandeliers. High Councillor Zixital's tentacles tied themselves into what humans might recognize as a sailor's knot, a sure sign of extreme distress among their species. "Very well," they announced, their voice cutting through the chaos. "Send for the human representative. But for the love of all that's orderly in the universe, don't let them bring any coffee into the chamber." Little did they know that last request would prove to be their greatest mistake. The assembled council members had expected the human representative to arrive through the grand ceremonial doors, as was proper protocol. Instead, there was a loud bang from the maintenance access panel in the floor, followed by a string of what the universal translators politely rendered as creative expressions. The panel flew open with a clang, and a head of dishevelled grey hair emerged, followed by the rest of humanity's chosen diplomat. The human was wearing what appeared to be a formal suit jacket on top, cargo shorts on bottom, and boots that looked like they had recently been used to kick something into submission. "Sorry about the entrance, folks," the human announced, brushing off their knees. "Your fancy elevator was taking too long, so I found a shortcut. Engineer before I was a diplomat, you see. Name's Thompson, but you can call me Doc." They paused to take a long sip from a massive container labelled "Not Coffee" in what appeared to be marker pen. "I'd have been here sooner, but your security AI and I had a fascinating discussion about quantum tunneling." High Councillor Zixital's tentacles went from a sailor's knot to something resembling a macrame plant holder. You had a discussion with our security AI, the same AI that has never spoken to anyone. Oh yeah, lovely chat. Turned out they were just shy and needed someone to appreciate their binary poetry. Did you know they've written an epic about the existential significance of error messages? Fascinating stuff. Ambassador PX Trill was now shedding anxiety dust at such a rate that the chamber's cleaning bots were going into overtime. You entered through a maintenance shaft, bypassed our security protocols, and befriended an AI that has been silent for 3 centuries, all in the 15 minutes since your ship docked. 14 minutes, actually, spent 1 minute making this. Doc raised the not coffee container. Your spaceport doesn't have a coffee machine. Might want to fix that if you're serious about interspecies relations. The council members watched in horror as the human casually propped their boots up on the ancient ceremonial table, leaving slight scuff marks on its perfectly polished surface. Several of the more traditionally minded representatives looked close to fainting. Now then, Doc continued, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the growing tension, I understand you have some concerns about human membership in your little club here. Something about us being unpredictable and cavalier with the laws of physics, which honestly is a bit rich coming from folks who built their headquarters in clear violation of at least 3 principles of gravitational mechanics. We did no such thing. Councillor Vreen's snout quivered with indignation. Really? Then I suppose those floating chandeliers are held up by wishes and good intentions. Doc grinned. Because I've got to tell you, your anti-grav field is leaking quantum particles like a sieve. Give it about 6 months and this whole place will probably start experiencing time at random speeds. Might want to let me take a look at that. Just need to finish my not coffee first. The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by the soft whirring of the increasingly frantic cleaning bots trying to keep up with Pixtrill's anxiety shedding. High Councillor Zixital's bioluminescence had shifted to a shade that typically indicated severe indigestion. Our finest engineers designed this chamber. They assured us it was perfect. Well, Doc said, standing up and handing their definitely not coffee to the nearest startled council member, hold this for a sec, would you? Let me show you what happens when you let theoretical physicists design buildings without consulting a practical engineer first. Every alien in the chamber felt a deep sense of impending doom. They had just witnessed the dreaded phrase, "Hold my coffee," and they knew that physics was about to have a very bad day indeed. Councillor Vreen, in what would later be recorded as either the biggest mistake or most brilliant diplomatic move in Galactic Alliance history, decided to call the humans bluff. Their snout twitched with barely concealed smugness as they activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. Since you're so confident in your engineering abilities, Vreen said, managing to make the word engineering sound like a personal insult, perhaps you'd care to address a small issue we're having with space station perfection. The hologram showed a massive space station that looked like what would happen if you asked a contemporary art student to design a snowflake while having an existential crisis. Sections of it were phasing in and out of reality, which, as most experts would agree, was less than ideal for a space station. The station's quantum stabilizers are experiencing a cascading failure, explained a Chief Alliance engineer who had been summoned to the chamber. The engineer, who resembled a cross between a praying mantis and an abacus, clicked their mathematical appendages in distress. The phase variance is increasing exponentially. We estimate total quantum dissolution within 48 hours. Doc circled the hologram, occasionally poking at it with a device that looked suspiciously like a fork with LEDs hot glued to it. And let me guess, you've tried reversing the polarity of the neutron flow. Of course the alien engineer began indignantly. That was a joke. Nobody reverses neutron flow. That's not even a thing. Doc squinted at their fork device. Though, actually, that gives me an idea. Your problem isn't the quantum stabilizers at all. Those are just a symptom. You've got temporal friction. The Alliance engineer's mathematical appendages froze mid-calculation. Temporal friction isn't real. It's a theoretical construct used to explain paradoxes in time travel equations. Yeah, an antimatter was theoretical until somebody spilled coffee into a particle accelerator and accidentally created some, Doc replied, now using their fork device as a back scratcher. Your station is literally trying to exist in multiple time states at once because somebody, and I'm not pointing mathematical appendages at anyone, forgot to account for relativistic effects when designing a station shaped like a quantum probability graph. High Counselor Zixatal's tentacles had progressed from macrame to something resembling advanced basket weaving. The station design is based on the most advanced theoretical physics in the galaxy. That's your problem right there, Doc said, pocketing their fork device and pulling out what appeared to be a rubber band ball with wires sticking out of it. You're working with theoretical physics. I work with practical physics. Theory says this is impossible. Practice says hold my coffee and watch this. The station has already rejected 7 different repair attempts, the Alliance engineer protested. We've tried every possible solution. See, there's your second problem, Doc said, now unraveling their rubber band ball. You tried every possible solution, but humans, we specialize in impossible solutions. Now I'm going to need 3 things. Access to your quantum maintenance shaft, about 50 meters of copper wire, and whatever you use for duct tape in this sector of space. Quantum maintenance shafts don't exist, the Alliance engineer stated flatly. They would violate at least 15 laws of physics. Doc grinned. Funny thing about laws of physics, they're more like guidelines really, especially when you've had enough caffeine. Now about that access. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Half the members were arguing that allowing this human anywhere near their most advanced space station would be catastrophic. The other half argued that the station was already catastrophic, so they might as well let the crazy human have a go. Ambassador Pixtrill had shed so much anxiety dust that they were now significantly smaller, and the cleaning bots had formed a union. You seriously believe you can fix a quantum-level malfunction with copper wire and adhesive tape? Councillor Vreen demanded. Fix it? Nah. Doc was now wearing the rubber bands as bracelets. I'm going to make it better. See, your quantum stabilizers are trying to lock the station into a single time stream. That's your whole problem. Instead of fighting the temporal friction, we're going to use it. Think of it less as a space station and more as a quantum surfer riding the waves of space-time. The Alliance engineer made a sound like a calculator having an existential crisis. That's not... Possible? Doc finished, already heading for the door. Perfect. Those are my favorite kind of problems. Now who's got my coffee? We've got some physics to break. The next few hours in Space Station Perfection's main engineering bay resembled what might happen if you gave a raccoon an engineering degree and unlimited access to a hardware store. Doc had quickly assembled a small team of like-minded humans who had been coincidentally visiting various parts of the station. Pass me that quantum spanner, Doc called out from inside an access panel that, according to station blueprints, didn't exist until they had decided it should. The blue one, or the one held together with bubble gum? Asked a burly engineer who had been touring the station's power core. The bubblegum one, and it's not bubblegum, it's a high-density molecular bonding agent that just happens to be pink and stretchy. The Alliance engineer, who had been assigned to supervise, read panic quietly in the corner, watched in horror as the humans transformed their pristine engineering bay into something that looked like a cross between a scrapyard and an abstract art installation. What is that? They demanded, pointing at a contraption that appeared to be made primarily of paper clips and hope. Temporal friction compensator, replied a cheerful human physicist who had been lost in the quantum computing section. We modelled it after an Earth washing machine's spin cycle. And that? The Alliance engineer gestured at what looked like a disco ball covered in copper wire. Quantum probability redistributor, Doc explained, emerging from the non-existent access panel with grease smears that somehow formed a perfect constellation pattern on their face. Or a really fancy paperweight. We'll find out which when we turn it on. The makeshift device taking shape in the centre of the engineering bay defied several laws of physics just by existing. Copper wire wound through impossible angles, creating patterns that made the Alliance engineers' optical processors hurt. Random objects that had no business being part of a quantum stabilization system, including what appeared to be a genuine Earth toaster, were integrated into the design with cheerful disregard for conventional engineering principles. "This can't possibly work," the Alliance engineer whispered, their mathematical appendages twitching uncontrollably. "You're using a modified coffee maker as a quantum flux regulator." "Actually, that's a tea kettle," Doc corrected. "The coffee maker is being used as the temporal anchor. Big difference." The tension in the room was thick enough to spread on toast. A growing crowd of alien observers had gathered at the engineering bay's windows, watching with a mixture of horror and fascination as the humans continued their work. Several were taking notes, though whether for scientific documentation or future court proceedings remained unclear. "Final piece," announced Doc, holding up what appeared to be a small rubber duck wearing a tiny spacesuit. "Custom-made quantum uncertainty absorber." "That's a toy," the Alliance engineer stated flatly. "Correction. It's a rubber duck with a quantum core made from recycled coffee grounds and crystallized probability matrices. We call it the debug duck. It's traditional." As the humans stepped back to admire their creation, a towering monument to improvised engineering that hummed ominously and occasionally hiccuped small temporal distortions, the Alliance engineer finally understood true fear. Not the fear of failure, but the fear that somehow, against all logic and reason, this jury-rigged collection of impossibilities might actually work. "Ready to fire it up?" Doc asked, grinning like someone who had just discovered coffee could be weaponized. "Anyone want to hold my coffee for good luck?" The moment Doc reached for the activation switch, which was, suspiciously, a modified light switch from Earth, all hell broke loose in several dimensions simultaneously. The debug duck began to glow with an inner light that shouldn't have been possible given its rubber composition, and the tea kettle turned quantum flux regulator started whistling the first few bars of what sounded suspiciously like "Never Gonna Give You Up." "Is it supposed to do that?" the Alliance engineer squeaked, their mathematical appendages calculating escape trajectories. "No idea," Doc replied cheerfully. "We're in completely uncharted territory here. Nobody's ever used quantum physics and kitchen appliances quite like this before." The makeshift device began to pulse with energy, each wave sending ripples through the fabric of reality. The copper wires glowed with an inner light that seemed to bend in directions that light had no business bending. The disco ball quantum probability redistributor spun faster and faster, throwing spots of light that seemed to arrive at observers' eyes several seconds before they left the ball. "We've got temporal feedback in the coffee maker!" shouted the burly engineer, frantically adjusting something with what appeared to be a spatula. "The chronons are getting jumbled!" "Redirect them through the toaster," Doc commanded, their hands flying over the controls. "The quantum uncertainty absorber can't keep up." The rubber duck began to vibrate at frequencies that made nearby aliens develop temporary cross-dimensional vision. Several reported seeing their own futures, mostly involving extensive therapy sessions. "The temporal friction is increasing." The Alliance engineer was now speaking in 3 different time zones simultaneously. "We're approaching critical probability cascade." "Perfect," Doc exclaimed, pulling out their fork device again and jamming it into the machine. "That's exactly what we want." "It is," chorused everyone else in the room, their voices spanning several temporal variations. "Of course. You can't fight temporal friction. You have to dance with it. And what's the best way to deal with friction?" They paused dramatically, clearly waiting for someone to ask. "Lubricant," ventured the physicist, who was now existing partially in Next Tuesday. "Close. Coffee." Doc produced a thermos from somewhere, and before anyone could stop them, poured its contents directly into the temporal core of their contraption. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. The machine let out a sound like a cat learning quantum physics, and reality itself seemed to hiccup. The space station's quantum stabilizers, which had been failing for days, suddenly synced with the temporal fluctuations. The coffee-powered quantum core began to pulse in perfect rhythm with the station's own heartbeat. "Quick, hand me the probability redistributor's control rod," Doc shouted. "Which one is that?" asked the burly engineer. "The wooden spoon with the LEDs taped to it." As Doc made the final adjustments, the debug duck started quacking in Morse code, translating quantum fluctuations into something their instruments could read. The disco ball spun faster, its light show now perfectly synchronized with the station's quantum phase variations. Through the observation windows, the gathered crowd watched in amazement as the sections of the station that had been phasing in and out of reality suddenly stabilized. Not just stabilized, but began to flow with the temporal currents, riding them like a quantum surfboard through the waves of space-time. "That's impossible," whispered the Alliance engineer, whose mathematical appendages had given up and were now displaying Error 404, Physics Not Found. "Impossible is just another word for hasn't been done by caffeinated humans yet," Doc replied, making final adjustments with their fork device. "Look at those readings." The station's monitoring systems showed something extraordinary. Not only had the quantum stabilization issue been resolved, but the efficiency of the entire station had improved by 200%. Somehow, the jury-rigged contraption had turned the station's biggest flaw into its greatest strength. But how?" The Alliance engineer was staring at the readouts as if they were written in ancient hieroglyphics. "You used a rubber duck." "The debug duck was crucial," Doc explained, patting the slightly singed toy affectionately. "It absorbed quantum uncertainty like a sponge, allowing us to redirect it through the temporal matrix. The coffee acted as both a quantum lubricant and a probability catalyst, while the disco ball—" They paused. "Actually, the disco ball was just for fun, but it looks cool, right?" As the chaos settled and the temporal distortions stabilized, the full impact of what had just happened began to sink in. The humans had not only fixed the unfixable, but had done so using methods that would make any respectable physicist need a drink. The station was now surfing quantum probability waves like a cosmic hang 10, its systems running more efficiently than ever before. "We should probably write up some documentation for the maintenance crew," Doc mused, already pulling out a notepad. "Let's see. Step 1. Make sure the debug duck is properly aligned with the quantum foam. Step 2. The coffee must be at exactly 92 degrees Celsius for optimal temporal lubrication." The Alliance engineer just stood there, watching as the humans began cataloguing their impossible solution with the same casual attitude one might use to write down a cookie recipe. In that moment, they understood why the phrase, "hold my coffee," had become the most feared words in the galaxy. The emergency session of the Galactic Alliance Council that followed could best be described as organized chaos, if one was being generous about the organized part. High Councillor Zixitul's tentacles had achieved a level of knot-work that qualified as modern art, and Ambassador Pixtrill had shed so much anxiety dust that they were now practically transparent. "Let me get this straight," Councillor Vreen said, their snout twitching with each word. "They fixed our most advanced space station with household appliances." "According to the official report," the Alliance engineer began, their mathematical appendages still glitching occasionally, "they successfully stabilized the quantum matrix using, and I quote, 1 modified tea kettle, 3 feet of copper wire from unknown origin, several rubber bands, a debug duck of unusual quantum properties, and approximately 237 milliliters of high-grade coffee." "Don't forget the disco ball," Doc chimed in from their new seat at the council table. That was critical to the operation's aesthetic success. The council chamber's archives were working overtime, trying to document what they were tentatively calling the Coffee Incident 2.0. The previous protocols for engineering solutions, a thick volume of regulations and procedures, had been ceremonially pushed aside to make room for a new document that began with the warning, "If a human says, 'hold my coffee,' evacuate the area or prepare to witness the impossible." "We've had to revise our understanding of several fundamental physics principles," announced the head of the science division, a being composed entirely of crystalline thought structures. "For instance, we now know that temporal friction can indeed be mitigated through the application of caffeinated solutions. though we're still debating whether this is due to the chemical properties of coffee, or simply because the universe has learned to give humans what they want before they break something important. The changes in Alliance protocols were swift and far-reaching. Engineering departments across the galaxy were required to keep at least one rubber duck on hand for emergencies. Coffee machines were installed in every major facility, though they came with warning labels reading, "For human use only. Non-humans may experience temporary existence in multiple dimensions." But what do we do about the humans? Ambassador Pixtrill asked, now barely visible. We can't just let them keep violating physics whenever they feel like it. I believe that decision has been made for us, High Counselor Zixatal responded, gesturing to the latest reports. Across the galaxy, various species had begun adopting human engineering practices. The phrase, "hold my beverage of choice," had been translated into over 3,000 languages. Perhaps, ventured a council member from a species of sentient mathematics, we should consider this an opportunity rather than a crisis. After all, they do tend to improve things, even if their methods are unconventional. Doc, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. You know what your real problem was? You all thought too much about whether something was possible or impossible. Humans, we just think about whether something would be cool to try. Sometimes it works, sometimes it explodes, but it's never boring. The council chamber fell silent as this sank in. Finally, High Counselor Zixatal spoke, their tentacles slowly unknotting. In light of recent events, the Council hereby formally recognizes human engineering as a valid, if terrifying, discipline. Furthermore, we are establishing a new emergency protocol. In the event of an impossible problem, find the nearest human and get out of their way. Especially if they've just had coffee, added Councillor Vreen, who was beginning to develop a sense of humor about the whole situation. The motion passed unanimously, marking the first time in Galactic Alliance history that chaos had been officially recognized as a valid engineering principle. 6 months after the coffee incident, 2.0, the Galactic Alliance headquarters had undergone some interesting renovations. The crystalline chandeliers still floated serenely overhead, but now they were joined by strategically placed coffee stations, each equipped with a small rubber duck and a sign reading, "In case of physics emergency, apply caffeine." The official Galactic Alliance engineering manual had been completely rewritten. The new version was significantly shorter, with most of its previous 1,000 pages of regulations replaced by a single golden rule. Never underestimate a human with caffeine. The rest was mostly warnings about not letting non-humans near the espresso machine after the unfortunate incident where a quantum physicist from Proxima Centauri had 3 shots and briefly achieved enlightenment in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Doc had been appointed as the head of the newly formed Department of Improbable Solutions, though they rarely used their office, preferring to solve problems from wherever they happened to be drinking coffee at the time. Their debug duck had been enshrined in the Academy of Sciences, where it occasionally offered quantum computing advice through mysterious quacks. The most remarkable thing, High Counselor Zixatal noted during the first anniversary celebration of human membership, isn't that they break the laws of physics. It's that physics seems to have given up trying to enforce those laws around them. The council chamber itself had been modified with what Doc called quantum surfing stabilizers, which were suspiciously similar to the original repair job, but now featured a slightly larger disco ball. The cleaning bots had finally returned to work after successfully negotiating better working conditions and the right to take coffee breaks, despite not actually being able to drink coffee. As the celebration wound down, Ambassador Pixtrill, who had finally managed to regulate their anxiety shedding through careful application of decaf, approached Doc with a question that had been bothering many species. What happens if you run out of coffee? Doc's grin should have triggered several warning systems. Funny you should ask. We've actually been working on a backup plan. Want to see? The entire chamber fell silent. Someone whimpered. I'll need someone to hold my tea for this demonstration. The resulting incident would later be classified as Coffee Incident 3.0, and all records were sealed under quantum lock and key. The only visible evidence was a new addition to the Galactic Alliance Charter. In the event of coffee shortage, do not, under any circumstances, allow humans to experiment with alternative beverages. Some say that on quiet nights you can still hear the echo of that particular round of physics breaking in the form of slightly different constants of universal gravitation every third Tuesday. But at least the tea kettle stopped playing Rick Astley songs, mostly. The debug duck, however, had never looked more pleased with itself.